relativistic transport theory, and I couldn't finish it last time, so I'll finish it in about 10 minutes, and then we'll do something else. So let me write down that collision term once again. So I said this is an integral differential equation. It's non-linear because you have the product of two F's. And although the microscopic interactions are invariant under time reversal, the whole equation is not. Boltzmann equation is not because it distinguishes past from the future. The assumption that the initial two-particle distribution function is replaced by a product of two single-particle distribution functions, assuming that the particles are not correlated. In the final state, of course, they are correlated because of energy momentum conservation, but it is being assumed that initial state they are not correlated. And this is for classical equation for Boltzmann particle. Now, if you want to introduce some quantum mechanics into this, and you want to treat particles as either fermions or bosons, then you have to make some suitable modifications. If there are fermions, let's say, then there has to be some separation because of Pauli exclusion principle. On the other hand, if they are bosons, then there will be an enhancement factor. So this will change into, let me denote this symbolically by prime. This is F prime, F1 prime, and then I need something like this. This F and F1 correspond with this T and T1. So this is for fermions, and then this W as before, and then this is F. F1 and F minus prime. If they are bosons, then instead of separation, there will be enhancement factors. And for Boltzmann particles, you don't need this. This is often done. So this way, you're treating them as treating these equations semi-classically. Some quantum mechanical effects are going into this. Now there are okay. So you have received some problems yesterday. Based on this. Now let's see what are the assumptions which have gone into writing this. assumptions in writing the collision term, apart from those assumptions which we made right at the beginning for kinetic field. Apart from those, we are making some additional assumptions. This is this assumption of replacing F2 by product of F1 is called hypothesis of molecular chaos, or in German it's called this. This means there are no correlations between initial this follows from the assumption of dilute gas. If gas is dilute enough, then this should be satisfied. The assumption that was made is here. These two particles are coming and interacting. So one has momentum P prime, other has momentum P1 prime, but we are evaluating their distribution function. Yes.
So yesterday, he asked in the tutorial how valid is this assumption of dilute gas in the initial stage of the collision.
In actual QGP experiments, it's assumed that this is valid, but actually it's not obvious. That the density is quite high. But many people follow this approach, kinetic theory approach.
There is no way to do it.
No, there are other models based on QCD, which I'm going to talk after I finish this. There they build up initial state using the QCD ideas, and then that information is fed into hydrodynamics. This does not mean that before collision there are no other collisions. Other collisions do take place, but they are sufficiently before so that again the momenta are not correlated. Okay, so I was saying that in this equation, although there are two particles having different momenta, they are coming together and colliding, we are putting the same value of x in both the factors. So that means x very slowly in space-time. Let's make quantitatively, that is on the microscopic scales, length and time, change in delta, change in F is 0. And what are these macroscopic scales of length and time? Those are the interaction range. or the time involved in the collision. So time that I'm talking about is duration of collision. And distance delta t is duration of collision and delta x is the range of interparticle interaction. So over these time and length scales, f doesn't change. That's an assumption.
What are the typical delta t and delta x and PGT?
And these are strong interaction time scales and lengths for me of fraction of over.
So over a few Fermi, f of x would vary slowly.
Would vary, but not at the scale of interaction. So these are the additional assumptions which we made while writing the collision term. So as you see, it's very complicated. Solving this equation is a very non-trivial process. W again is the rate of this reaction or collision, and it involves, of course, cross sections. So in the case of QCD, you have to put QCD cross sections, parton, parton, gluon, etc. So people have done this. They have huge computer programs which take care of all this information. So one very well-known model is called AMPT. It's a multi-phase parton transport model. This right from the beginning of collision until the particles are detected, all that space-time history is mimicked by this computer program. And there are other similar programs. But very often for analytic calculations, one makes an assumption and replaces that collision term by something else in much simpler form. Let me do that. It's called relaxation time approximation. And the system relaxes quite fast if you disturb it. And in that, so let me start with non-relativistic notation. Del F by del T is V dot del F. I am ignoring the external forces. And in the relaxation time approximation, collision term is replaced by this. Where S is the same as on the left hand side, and this is the equilibrium distribution function, and this is some parameter, typical collision time. So tau is the parameter which is to be determined, or you can, if you have some theoretical estimate, you can put in that value. So if tau is very small, then the collision term will be important and the system will be quickly driven to the equilibrium. Tau is small, tau is very large, then this term is not important and the system will relax rather slowly. Relax means going from non-equilibrium to equilibrium. So this is what is called relaxation time approximation. Now let's try to put it in a covariant form. So as before, we multiply by energy. free momentum. So the left hand side is now P mu del mu. So left hand side looks okay and relativistic really. Now we want to write this also in a covariant form. So E is replace E by E dot U. So if we evaluate this in the frame in which U mu is 1, 0, then you get energy. So this is the Boltzmann equation in the relaxation time approximation. Let me start a new topic, which is the topic of color glass condensation. It is a model of the incoming state in the collision based on QCD. One more advantage of relaxation time approximation is you can solve this equation analytically in a formal way. You can write the solution analytically as some integral. Okay, I'll start with a question. I showed you the diagram of photon distribution functions as a function of x, where x goes all the way from 1 to very small values. Now, which of those values of x are relevant for our purpose? That is the question. What is the relevant Gaussian x scale at Rick and LHC? So at Rick and LHC, we are talking about hadron-hadron collision or nucleus-nucleus collision. So let's start with this proton-proton collision. This is a proton. This is also a proton. It is carrying momentum P1. This is a 4 momentum P1, 4 momentum P2, and this is a quark. This is anti-quark. And it carries the fraction x1 from the original parent momentum. So this is x1 P1. And this antiquark carries fraction x2, which is x2 P2. And this is the gluon. This is one representative or typical process that will happen when two protons collide. The simplest order, the lowest order. Now let's calculate S. S is for this whole process, for the overall center of transfer. What is the expression for S? P1 plus P2 square. what is P1 plus P2 square? Yeah, these are 4 momenta.
P1 plus P2 means P1 plus P2.
Yeah, but you can square it like you square A plus B square, you can do same thing here.
M1 square plus E1.
P1 square, what is P1 square?
M1 square.
Mass of the proton, which is how much?
1
1 GeV. And we are talking about energies which are in hundreds or thousands of GeV. So we will ignore proton mass. So forget P1 square, forget P2 square. And what is left is y P1 GeV. Ignoring proton mass. Now let's do same thing for this. This is for the sub process. By sub process I mean this quark anti-quark colliding giving a gluon. That's the sub process. So what is the S for the sub process denoted by S hat?
X1 P1.
Yeah, it is x1 p1 plus x2 p2 whole square. So first term is x1 square p1 square, which is even smaller than 1 GeV because x is always between 0 and 1. This is also negligible. So what's left with it? Y x1, x2, p1, p2, which you can write in terms of this. So it is x1, x2, and the sub-process S is related with the overall process S like this. Now as a thumb rule, we write it as a thumb rule. So you know that the PDFs depend on x as well as q square. So what value of q square is important? It says that as a thumb rule, the proton PDFs need to be known at q square, which is equal to m square. And what is m? M is the characteristic mass scale for a process under sub-process under consideration. So for this sub-process, the relevant mass scale is the S hat. Or square. S hat would, m square would be S hat. So here, m square is S hat. The relevant mass scale is given by this equation. And therefore, q square is S hat. Is this clear? And we already calculated what is S hat. S1, 2 and S. So this tells you that the relevant value of X is like 2 upon root S. Or the root of Q square. And this is Pt where Pt is a transverse momentum of the bulk of particles which are produced in the collision. And bulk of particles which are produced in these collisions are pions with typical momentum 1 GeV. So Pt in this case is about 1 GeV.
Why is Q2 PTC and
Why is this equality? What is Q square? It is relevant momentum scale, right? Square root of that relevant momentum scale. And what is the relevant momentum scale in our case? It is the transverse momentum of most of the particles. There are jets produced with very high Pt, but that is not relevant here. Bulk of the particles have this kind of momentum, and that is the most relevant scale for our purpose.
so the highest scale is not relevant, what is relevant is where the most particles are produced.
Right. There are partons produced with hundreds of GeV, but those are jets which are not of relevance for our purpose. More than 99% particles are of this energy range. So try to calculate these values. What are these values? What will be the x at RIC and at LHC? What is the case at RIC? It is 100 plus 100, so total 200 GeV. Of that order, 10 raised to minus 3. And at LHC, two 760 GeV, or later on they will also use these higher energy. This is typically 10 raised to minus 4. So the values of x which are relevant here are 10 raised to minus 3 or minus 4. If you go to higher and even higher energies, it will become even smaller and smaller. So one needs PDS or values of x above this. Minimum 10 raised to minus 3 or minus 4, all the way up to 1. But this is the more relevant and important reason, because large number of gluons have a low momentum or low x. This you have seen before. This is a mu square equal to 10 GeV square. The momentum scale is 10 GeV square. Here it is 10 raised to 4 GeV square. And one observation is we already made, that as you go to smaller x, the gluons dominate here as well as here. There is one more observation, that as you go to higher values of mu square or q square, there are more gluons. But not only that, look at these two, UV here and UV here, or DV here and DV here. Do you see any difference? Apart from the height is different, any other difference?
It is less so the left hand side is more steep.
Yeah, it is peak is higher, but apart from that, there is something else is happening. Where is the peak located? Located somewhere here, right? here it is located slightly to the left. And that's true for all other curves also. They are getting pushed to the left. That is to small values of x. Do you understand why it's happening? Yeah, let's look at only q1 square. This is at some q1 square, and this is at q2 square, which is higher. And the curve has got shifted to the left. Do you understand this qualitatively?
There are more particles that can be produced.
What is q square? Increasing q square, what does it mean? Q square is the resolution of the probe. You're sending a photon with this kind of 4 momentum square, and larger q square means the photon can see a smaller, can resolve smaller length scales. So if you probe deeper, you will see more particles with smaller momentum. Right? So that's consistent with this figure, that if you go to higher q square, you see more particles with smaller average. This is x. So momentum is less. X is a measure of momentum. It's less. So that's another observation from this figure. One more thing which is not obvious. That is, gluon distributions are rising like a power law. Gx squared goes like 1 upon x raised to delta. And this should go to infinity as x goes to 0. If you have a machine with high enough energy, with high enough root s, then x will be small and this will tend to go to infinity. It's a power law, so that means the rise is fast relative to logarithmic rise. It's a fast rise. And you can see that as q square increases, the PDFs evolve. They evolve with q square. They of course also evolve with x. And x changes, it changes. Q square changes, also they change. So they evolve with both x and q square. And then there are evolution equations which quantify all this. We will come to that later on. The evolution equations. Which evolve the PDFs from one value of q square to another value of q square, or one value of x to another value of x. We'll come back to this later. Neutron or a proton, it can be proton. And this is a transverse. Suppose I cut the proton in some plane, then it would look like this. Some part on screen. So the incoming photon, the virtual photon, this was our diagram, right? This is electron, this is the virtual photon, and this is the quark. So the virtual photon which is coming, it sees the hadron like this, and these are the partons. Partons are intrinsic size because they have intrinsic momentum. Apart from longitudinal momentum, Z is related to X. So partons have longitudinal momentum, but they also have an intrinsic transverse momentum. Which I will denote by KT. So this is equivalent to saying they have intrinsic transverse size, which is shown in this figure. So this is like saying they have intrinsic size. RT would be going like this. And this is our probe, gamma star is the probe. What is the size of the probe? It will be decided by Q square. Q is the forward momentum of the virtual photon, and Q square is defined by this. Because this small q square is negative, so it's convenient to introduce this new variable, capital Q square. And it is a measure of how good your resolution is. This is our probe, and the probe size will be 1 upon the root of Q square. And this, now there are partons of various sizes, but this probe cannot see all of them. If something is very small, smaller than the size of the probe, then it cannot resolve that. Probe can see only partons which are larger than its own size. Probe can see partons above this size only, above this size. So what that means is RT square or RT square the virtual photon can see only some of the partons. As Q square increases, you can see more and more. The number will increase.
In figure, you have written that capital Q square equal to minus small q square.
Yeah.
So minus sign means then Q itself becomes imaginary.
Q square is a square of a 4 vector. This photon has a 4 momentum Q, and if you take Q square, the number is negative. The value is negative. That is why this is positive.
How do we know that Q square is always negative?
Okay, you can calculate what is Q. The difference between the cell. Suppose this momentum is K, this is K prime. Q is going this way. Q is basically difference of K and K prime, and you will do the calculation yourself. All these are 4 vectors. You will find that Q square is always negative. And in the high energy limit, like electron masses are negative. Okay, so the number rises as number of partons that the probe can see, that number rises and their size decreases as Q square increases. look at this figure. This is log of q square, that is increasing q square is like this. This is log of 1 upon x. That means as you go up, x is decreasing. And this is the largest x and smaller x again. So as q square increases, you see more of partons, but their size is become smaller because the probe is now has a better resolution. And this stands for the name of the equation which evolves the periods. Ribau-Lipatow Alta-Rayleigh-Parisi, often called Alta-Rayleigh-Parisi equation. So that equation evolves as a function of q square. There is another equation called EFKL, and that evolves along this axis, x direction. Now we'll try to later on we'll try to understand this region of the diagram.
So what's the statement there that
As
deep inelastic scattering? So let's say I'm doing a deep inelastic scattering at q square is equal to, I don't know, 3 GeV square.
yeah,
Then any pattern that has momentum, transverse momentum below 3 GeV square will not participate in that. Is that clear? Why?
no. The probe, that is photon, the virtual photon can see partons, only these partons it can see. Those which have a size larger than its own size,
Right.
which is the same thing as this statement, the identical statement. That means it can see only those partons whose momentum is smaller than its own momentum.
Right. So that means
So what-
anything with a large transverse momentum will not participate in a deep inelastic scattering experiment. Any pattern with a deep large transverse momentum.
Yeah, the large PT partons will not be seen by the photon.
This C is only spatial resolution, right? Not participation itself.
Yeah, in the lowest order diagram, seeing is the same as participating. In a higher order processes, you can see those which don't satisfy this. If suppose there are larger momentum parton, it can emit a smaller momentum parton which satisfies this. Then the photon can see that. Indirectly, it can see a parton which has higher, but in a lowest order process, it will see only this. I had one figure, I think I lost it somewhere. Let me see if I can find it here. Okay. So this shows the total cross sections of proton-proton, hadron-proton. This is proton-proton cross. I had a better figure, but I can't find it. This is total cross section for proton-proton or antiproton, antiproton-proton in the high energy limit. Root S is 10⁴ or even higher. So highest energies are shown here, and you see here the proton cross section is also increasing. Proton-proton cross section is increasing, and people have worried about this. What is the theoretical limit? Is there any theoretical limit? How fast the proton cross section can keep on rising and to go to higher and higher energy? People starting from Werner Heisenberg onward, people have proposed what would be the behavior of cross sections at in the high energy limit. And the present knowledge is that this cross section rises logarithmically. Sigma total Cp or P bar C in the high energy limit was like log S is the relevant S, the center of mass energy square, and S0 is some parameter which may depend on what kind of hadrons you are taking. But the general behavior is the same, only as values of S0 may change from one species to another species. It is rising logarithmically as S increases or energy increases. Now, in other words, cross section rising, you can look at it pictorially as the proton itself is becoming bigger. Because two protons are colliding, and that means unless they are bigger, this is a rough way of looking at it. So in a sense, proton is also becoming bigger as you go to higher and higher energy. But it becomes bigger logarithmically. So this is logarithmic rise. It is slow. Now we saw that gluon, G of x, that was going like x raised to lambda, with the power, right? So eventually this will overtake this rise. As you go to smaller and smaller x or higher and higher energy, the gluon's rise will overtake this, which means, and the gluons have transverse size, so they will tend to fill up the whole proton, this transverse area. And after that, once that is filled up, you cannot, proton is not becoming bigger fast enough. So there is a problem here. Gluons are rising very fast, so in a way cross section is going to infinity, but experiments tell us that cross section is not going to infinity. It is rising much more slowly. So what must happen is, if you go to small enough x, the gluons have to fuse together. The number cannot arbitrarily keep on rising. They have to, this kind of process will start becoming important. Fusion of gluons. That will reduce the number. So what you saw here is not only experimental observation, but theoretical expectation is also consistent with this. This is not only equations are based on very general ideas like unitarity, that is conservation of probability, or relativistic invariance, causality. So these are expectations based on very general ideas, and they also say that cross-section would rise like this. And there's a name for this kind of, it's called Crossa bound. This is the bound on how fast the cross-section can rise. So the bottom line is gluons have to fuse together as you go to smaller and smaller x. And I mentioned some evolution equations. So the evolution equations tell you how the fusion takes place, or how the evolution with x and q squared takes place. Looks like this. So this is the PDF, Barton distribution function depends on x and q square, and this equation tells you how it evolves with q square. Alpha is this strong coupling constant, and this is what is called splitting function. That means it is this kind of process. This is the parent parton. It emits another parton with momentum x and gluon with momentum y minus x. And this splitting function tells you what is the probability of that happening. So the fraction x upon y is carried by this. This is the original momentum, and this carries fraction x upon y of y. That's why this x upon y is operating. Splitting function depends on what fraction the parton will carry of the parent. This is lowest order. There are higher order processes which you don't have to worry. Just have to remember that this is an equation which evolves, it tells you how the PDF evolves with q square. Then there are equations called DFKL, which I am not going to write. It tells you about evolution with x. As x becomes smaller, how does PDF change? So that is given by this. And then there is something called GLR equation. This is Ribot. That equation tells you how the fusion takes place. Just notice that this equation is linear, right? Linear in Barton distribution function. And also integral differential equation. And the Ribot equation. Now, if the fusion is taking place, then you have to bring in two gluons. the equation will not be linear. You need product of two periods. So unlike this is a nonlinear equation. In some limit, I am going to write a form of this equation. Phi is, I'm just changing notation, doesn't matter, you can write Q also here. And I is the species, it can be whatever flavor, between quark and dequark or whatever, which I have not written, but that doesn't matter, it's just PDF as a function of x and q squared, and is evolving with x as well as q squared. So this is the leading term. Then there is another higher order term. So this is the GLR equation. The leading term is linear in PDF and this term is quadratic in F. Linear in F. And Q square is there. R is some length scale which tells you the size of the hadron. R could be size of the nucleus also, depending on what is your target. So the product R square Q square is done. So when is this term important? When will the second term be important? When Q square is small. So if Q square is small, this term will be important. For very large Q square, you can ignore this. But when the two terms become equal, that is what is called the saturation. That means gluon rise has to saturate because of gluon fusion. Gluons cannot continue to rise forever, but eventually the fusion will take place and then it will tend to saturate. So that's why that point is called saturation point, and the corresponding Q square is called saturation Q square. So by equating the quantity or expression in the square brackets, you will get 2s square x as this is the saturation number. So if this is Q square, Q square is smaller than this, then the second term is important, right? Q square larger than this, then the first term will dominate. So this is the non-linear region. This is the linear. A small Q square, the second term starts becoming important, or the non-linear effects become important. This is the region where gluons are fusing. that is not very likely here. In this case.
What does it mean for gluons to fuse?
That is the okay. This is the process. Two gluons fusing into a single gluon.
So that the size of the proton remains constant.
The size doesn't remain constant, but you don't have that problem of partons occupying more space than the proton is providing. Proton size is rising lower than the gluon distribution, which we don't want to happen. And one more thing, as x becomes smaller, we know that this starts becoming it becomes larger and larger. So QA square will also increase as x is smaller. QA square x. Because the rise of xg. So now I think we can understand this other figure. So very low values of q square below lambda QCD square is the region of non-perturbative QCD. Very small moment, you cannot apply perturbative QCD, and this is lambda QCD. So that is shown by the shaded area. Perturbative QCD should be applicable over in this larger the better. Now what we found is as x decreases, QA square is increasing. That means this point is shifting to the right. This is shifting to the right, means non-linear region is important, becoming bigger and bigger. Linear region is shrinking. So that is what is happening here. Now this is a non-linear region or saturation region which is increasing as you go to smaller x. And the linear region where de-Claude equation is valid is becoming smaller and smaller. That follows from this equation.
Last one is zero.
The GL it's not shown here, but it does both evolution in x as well as q square. Okay, one more thing I didn't mention. As I already mentioned it, as you go to higher q square, the numbers increase and size becomes smaller. But as you go to smaller x, the numbers increase, but the size doesn't become smaller because you are probing with the same probe. Q square is kept fixed here. Q square is not changing, so the size is not changing, but the number is increasing. So essentially what's happening is the first term was like alpha s into some density, and the second term was alpha s square density square. This is the linear term, alpha s times some density of parton distribution function. The second was alpha s square. And so if they are to be equal, then this implies rho will go like 1 upon alpha s, or alpha s will go like 1 upon density. So higher and higher density, you have large number of gluons, right, at small x. So higher density will be giving rise to small alpha s, small coupling constant. lambda QC is about 0.2 GeV. It's clear from that figure. If you go to small values of x, then Qs, the saturation momentum is very large. So you can safely use perturbative QC. Qs is very large compared to lambda. Perturbative QCD can be applied there. As I showed, coupling constant is also very small. There's a weak coupling. This was shown there. The rho density or occupation number goes like this. So smaller alpha means occupation numbers are very large. So you have very large density. So it looks like a condensate in quantum mechanics. It can be treated classically.
This is only within the proton or neutron.
Neutron? Did you say neutron?
Only within the neutron,
Yeah.
not outside. Not outside.
If it is a nucleus is the target, then the same thing happens in the nucleus also. The occupation number is this, which is large. The dense medium can be treated classically. But weak coupling doesn't mean it is not strongly interacting. But gravity is also weakly coupling, right? Gravitational interaction is weakly coupled. But because of the coherent effect of large number of particles, gravity can make its effect prominent. Similar thing happens here. Although coupling constant is small, they're acting in a coherent way, and so it is still strongly interacting. Like gravity, similar to gravity. The weak interaction can, because of the coherent effect, can look like strongly interacting. So coherence can amplify the effects of intrinsically weak interaction. Now, with all this information, some people made a model of the incoming nucleus. So each nucleus looks like a wall of gluons because of Lorentz contraction. And that wall of gluons contains this kind of matter, which is alpha S is small, but occupation numbers are large, so it is strongly interacting, although basic coupling is weak. So, color glass condensate is dense, weakly coupled, but strongly interacting. TGC is this dense, weakly coupled, strongly interacting matter in the nuclear wave function. So it's like a wall of gluon. CGC is coherent, unlike UGP, which is incoherent. UGP has distinct particles, while this is acting in a coherent way. The form of QCD matter associated with V partons. The systematic effective theory description. The systematic effective theory description of the classical small x degrees of freedom. Now let me explain why it is called color glass condenser. Color, obviously, because the partons are colored. Why is it called glass? Glass, as you know, the window glass, it is solid or liquid, you know. It is solid on short time scale. Short means 200 years, but on time scale longer than that, it acts like liquid. So there are two different time scales. And this is ordinary glass, has two different time scales. Or in other words, glass is also a highly disordered system. It's not like a crystal. It's a disordered system. And there are two time scales. Something similar happens here. I will show there are two time scales here also. Ordinary glass, solid, on short time scale, and liquid on long time scale. So, let's see now why there are two kinds of small x, small small x gluons and large x gluons. Both are present inside the proton, right? We have all kinds of gluons. So small x means small longitudinal momentum, small momentum, and this is large momentum. Of course, longitudinal momentum. So because the momenta are small, there is not much time dilation happening here. here the moments are large, so there is significant time dilation. Not much time dilation means their natural time scale is short. Here the natural time scale will be long because it's time dilation. Their own natural or intrinsic time scale short, and here it is long. So how will the evolution be? Will it slow or fast? If the time scale is short, the evolution will be very fast compared to here. Here it will be slow. So we see there are small X gluons and large X gluons at different time scales. However, where do the small X gluons come from? They come when the large X gluons emit smaller X gluons. So they are coupled. They are not independent entities. Small X gluons rise from large X gluons. So although they would like to evolve faster, because of this entanglement, they couple to them, they are forced to evolve slowly. So there is what is called frustration in solid state physics. Their time scale is one, but they are forced to behave in a different way. It's called frustration. Solid state physics, spin glasses also exhibit frustration. One simple way to see is this, geometry, something called geometric frustration. If you have a square lattice, or if you can have a triangular lattice, and in an antiferromagnet, the atoms tend to align in anti-parallel way. So you can suppose this is going upward, this will go downward, and this will go downward, and this will go upward. So they are all nicely arranged. Each of the neighboring ones are anti-parallel. So there is no frustration there. But if a triangular lattice, and if this is up, this is down, then this fellow doesn't know what to do. Cannot decide whether to go up or align upward or downward. So this is the frustrated antiferromagnet. This is not frustrated. So similar thing happens in spin glasses. They are also disordered like ordinary glass. So I explained why it is called color, why is it called glass. There are two time scales. Why is it called condensate? Because it's like a Bose-Einstein condensate. The occupation numbers are very large number of gluons, and they are being treated in a classical way, similar to Bose condensate. because of the coherence effect. So now we have these two color glass plates. Two plates, each is having a color glass condensate in them, and they are coming and colliding. So as a result of collision, so this picture, soon after the collision, it's something like a magnet, and each of them is these are color flux lines produced in proton-proton or nucleus collision just after the collision. We started with color glass condensate plates, and then that is before collision. Now soon after collision, this is what it looks like, and this state is called plasma. It's a combination of both glass and plasma. So CGC comes first, then plasma, and then later on quark-gluon plasma is formed.
So do we know that these things are formed, this plasma is formed experimentally?
Experimentally, we know that quark-gluon plasma is formed, but these are models of the time period when before plasma was formed. These are models of theory, effective theory. There is some evidence for it, but there are also something it cannot explain. So it is an active area of research. All right, I will stop.